The hotel was shining like a dream. Golden lights covered the tall walls. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling like frozen stars. Soft music played in the background. Every corner of the luxury hotel spoke only one word: money. Tonight was special. It was the billionaire's birthday. The richest people of the city were there. Businessmen in black suits. Women in expensive dresses. Watches that cost more than a house. Laughter filled the air. Glasses clinked. Everyone felt proud to be invited. They were not just celebrating a birthday. They were celebrating power. At the center of it all stood the billionaire himself, Richard Hale. Tall, confident, cold eyes. A man who never smiled unless he wanted something. People surrounded him, praising him. "You are an inspiration, sir. Your success story is unbelievable. You rule this city." Richard listened quietly. A small smile stayed on his lips. He enjoyed moments like this, moments where everyone looked up to him. Near the entrance, security guards stood alert. No poor face was allowed inside. This party was only for the elite. Then suddenly, the big glass doors opened. A man walked in. He stopped just inside the hall. He wore old shoes. His shirt was clean but very simple. His trousers were worn out at the edges. His hair was neatly combed, but his face showed tired lines. He looked completely out of place. For 1 second, the music felt softer. Some guests turned their heads. Then more people noticed him. Silence spread slowly, and then laughter. Soft laughs at first, then louder. Someone near the bar whispered, "Who is that?" Another laughed. "Did he get lost?" A woman covered her mouth, trying not to laugh. "Is this a joke?" Someone said openly. The poor man stood still. His hands were by his side. His back was straight. He did not look afraid. He did not look angry. He simply looked calm. One of the guards rushed toward him. "Hey, you can't be here," the guard said loudly. The man did not move. At that moment, Richard Hale noticed the noise. His eyes moved toward the entrance. He saw the man. For a second, Richard's face showed surprise. Then his lips curved into a cold smile. "Oh," Richard said, loud enough for people to hear. "My driver has arrived." The laughter grew louder. "The driver?" Someone laughed. "At a billionaire's party?" Richard raised his glass slightly. "Relax," he said. "Let him stay." The guard looked confused. "But sir," Richard waved his hand. "It's fine. Tonight is about fun." The guests smiled. They understood. This was entertainment for them. The poor driver walked forward slowly. His shoes made soft sounds on the marble floor. Every step felt heavy, yet steady. People stared at him openly now. Some took out their phones. Some shook their heads. Some laughed without shame. "He looks like he came to clean the floor," a man joked. The driver heard everything, but he said nothing. Richard watched him closely. His smile stayed, but his eyes were sharp. He wanted to see how far this would go. The driver stopped a few steps away from Richard. They stood facing each other. Rich guests, bright lights, expensive music, and between all of it, a poor man in simple clothes. Richard looked him up and down. "You are late," Richard said calmly. "I came as fast as I could," the driver replied. His voice was soft, clear, confident. Some guests stopped laughing. They did not expect that voice. Richard raised an eyebrow. "You know this is a private party, right?" "Yes," the driver said. "And you still walked in like this?" Richard asked. "Yes." The answer was simple. Too simple. The room felt strange now. A man near Richard laughed loudly to break the tension. "Sir, maybe he thinks this is his house." More laughter followed. Richard smiled again. "Tell me," he said to the driver, "why are you here?" The driver looked around the room. At the people who laughed. At the people who judged him. At the lights, the money, the pride. Then his eyes returned to Richard. "I was invited," he said. A woman laughed sharply. "By who?" The driver did not answer her. Richard leaned slightly forward. "By who?" he asked again. The driver took a deep breath. He looked at Richard. Not as a servant, not as a poor man, but as someone who knew something others did not. You invited me, he said. The laughter stopped. For a moment, even the music felt distant. Richard's smile froze. I don't remember inviting you like this, Richard said slowly. The driver nodded. I know. Then something changed. The driver stepped one step closer. His voice dropped, but every word was clear. You don't recognize me, he said softly. But you should. The room went completely silent. No laughter. No whispers. No music. Richard's heart skipped a beat. His eyes locked onto the driver's face. Something about those eyes felt familiar. Very familiar. The driver held his gaze. Calm. Strong. Unafraid. And in that moment, Richard felt something he had not felt in years. The silence in the hall felt heavy. No one laughed now. No one spoke. All eyes moved between the billionaire and the poor driver. Richard Hale was the first to react. He forced a smile. You talk like you know me? Richard said calmly, though his voice felt tight. But I meet hundreds of people. Don't take it personally if I don't remember. Some guests relaxed. A few even smiled again. Yes, a man said loudly. Sir meets important people, not drivers. Laughter returned, but weaker than before. The driver did not smile. I didn't say you met me, he replied. I said you should recognize me. That confidence again. It made people uncomfortable. Richard lifted his glass and turned slightly toward the guests. Looks like my driver is tired, he said jokingly. Long hours can confuse the mind. More laughter followed. The driver looked down for a moment. Many thought he felt ashamed. But when he raised his head again, his eyes were calm. One of the guests, a rich young man in a blue suit, stepped forward. So, he said with a grin, what do drivers do now? Give speeches at parties. People laughed. Richard chuckled too. Don't worry, he said. He won't stay long. He looked at the security guards. Let him serve drinks. At least he'll be useful. The guards hesitated, then nodded. The driver said nothing. He took a tray from a nearby table and began serving drinks. People watched him closely now. Some laughed quietly. Some whispered cruel words. Look at his shoes. Probably worth nothing. He should be grateful he's even inside. The driver moved slowly, carefully. He did not spill a single drop. A woman held out her glass without looking at him. When he handed it to her, she looked up and froze. For a second, she felt strange. His eyes were not weak. They were not begging. They were deep, thoughtful. She looked away quickly. Across the room, Richard watched everything. He told himself this was harmless fun. But something inside him felt uneasy. The driver stopped near a group of businessmen talking loudly. We should invest more in foreign markets, one said proudly. The returns are always higher. The driver paused. He spoke softly. Not always. The men turned toward him, surprised. What did you say? One asked. The driver looked at them politely. Foreign markets can be risky. Local expansion gives more control. The men laughed. And a driver knows this? One mocked. Yes, the driver replied calmly. Because I studied it. The laughter stopped again. What did you study? Another asked. Business, the driver said simply. People stared. Someone laughed nervously. This is getting funny. Richard stepped forward. Enough, he said. You're here to work, not talk. The driver nodded. As you wish. But the damage was done. Whispers started again, but different now. How does he speak like that? He doesn't sound uneducated. Did you hear his English? Richard felt eyes on him. He raised his voice. Relax, everyone, he said. He reads too much. That's all. Some laughed. Some did not. The driver continued serving drinks. As he walked, memories filled his mind. Long nights, old books, dreams he once had, dreams he had buried. A man deliberately stepped into his path. The tray shook. A glass fell and broke on the floor. Gasps filled the room. Oh no, the man said fake kindly. Careless. The driver bent down immediately. "I'm sorry," he said. Richard watched closely. He expected anger. He expected tears. But the driver simply cleaned the mess. Quietly, dignified. That made Richard uncomfortable. A true servant breaks inside, Richard thought. This man did not. When the driver stood up, their eyes met again. For a brief second, Richard felt something sharp in his chest. A memory tried to rise, but he pushed it away. "You should leave after this," Richard said coldly. The driver nodded. "I will," he said. Then he added softly, "But not before you remember." Richard stiffened. "Remember what?" he asked. The driver looked around the hall one last time. "At the truth," he said. The music started again. People tried to enjoy the party. But the feeling had changed. The laughter felt forced. The smiles felt weak. Richard took a sip of his drink. For the first time that night, tasted bitter. The driver walked away from the bright hall. The music grew softer behind him. Laughter still echoed, but it no longer touched his heart. He stood near a tall window at the side of the hotel. Outside, the city lights shone like distant stars, beautiful yet cold. For a moment he closed his eyes. Memories returned, not from today, but from long ago. He was not always a driver. Once he was just a boy, a young boy with big dreams. He remembered a small house, old walls, a weak roof, but inside that house lived hope. His father used to sit with him every night. "Knowledge is power," his father would say. "No one can steal it from you." The boy listened carefully. He studied hard. He read books while others slept. He believed life would change. And for some time it did. He became one of the best students. Teachers praised him. Neighbors spoke his name with pride. But life is not always kind. One night, everything broke. His father fell sick. Very sick. Hospitals. Bills. Fear. The boy watched his mother cry quietly at night. He felt helpless. Soon after, his father died. With him, the dreams died too. The family had no money, no support. The boy had to choose. Dreams or survival. He chose survival. Years passed. He worked small jobs, cleaned floors, carried boxes, drove cars. He never told anyone who he was. He never spoke about his past. He learned one thing very early. The world respects money, not effort. Inside the hotel, the driver opened his eyes. He looked down at his hands. Hands that once held books. Now they held keys. A voice broke his thoughts. "You look lost." He turned. A young waiter stood there, nervous, curious. "You don't belong here," the waiter said softly. "But you also don't look like a servant." The driver gave a small smile. "Life changes people," he replied. The waiter nodded. "People there. They were cruel." "I know," the driver said. He had known cruelty long before tonight. Across the hall, Richard Hale stood with his guests. He laughed when needed. He smiled when required. But his eyes kept moving. Toward the window. Toward the driver. Something about that man disturbed him. Not his clothes. Not his words. His calm. Richard had built his empire by breaking others. He knew fear. He knew weakness. But this man showed neither. Richard turned to one of his old business partners. "Do you know that driver?" he asked casually. The man shrugged. "No, but he speaks well." "Yes," Richard said slowly. "Too well." The partner laughed. "Maybe he's pretending." Richard did not laugh. The driver walked back toward the center of the hall. People noticed him again. Some rolled their eyes. Some whispered. A woman spoke loudly. "Still here." The driver ignored her. He walked closer to Richard. Richard felt his chest tighten. "You should leave," Richard said quietly. "You had your fun." The driver shook his head. "I did not come for fun," he said. "Then why?" Richard asked. The driver looked straight into his eyes. "Because you forgot," he replied. Richard felt anger rise. "Forgot what?" he snapped. The driver lowered his voice. "Where you came from," he said. That hit harder than expected. Richard stepped back slightly. The guests went silent again. "You think you know me?" Richard said coldly. I do, the driver replied. Better than they do. A man laughed nervously. This is nonsense. But Richard could not speak. A memory knocked inside his mind. A small office. A younger face. A man who trusted him. Richard clenched his jaw. You're crossing a line, he warned. The driver nodded. I crossed many lines to stand here, he said. There was pain in his voice now. Not anger. Pain. Richard looked at him carefully. The voice. The eyes. The calm strength. Suddenly, a name tried to surface in his mind. His heart began to beat faster. The driver leaned slightly closer. You still don't remember, he said softly. But you will. Richard swallowed hard. The party continued around them. But for these two men, time had stopped. The party moved on, but something was broken. Laughter filled the hall again, yet it felt forced. Music played louder, trying to hide the tension. The driver stood near a table, holding a tray. Eyes followed him everywhere. Some guests whispered. Some stared openly. A rich woman in a red dress snapped her fingers. Driver, she said loudly, without looking at him. Bring me another drink. The driver walked toward her. As he handed her the glass, she looked at him and smiled coldly. You should be thankful, she said. Not everyone gets to stand among important people. The driver nodded. Thank you, he said softly. Her smile faded. She expected anger. She expected shame. But his calm made her feel small. Nearby, a group of men laughed loudly. One of them spoke up. Sir, he said to Richard. Your driver is very brave. Richard forced a smile. Yes, he replied. He forgets his place sometimes. The words cut deep. The driver heard them. His fingers tightened slightly around the tray. But he said nothing. Another guest stood up with his phone in hand. Wait, he said laughing. Let's take a picture. The flash went off. The driver looked away. Why not? The man said. It's not every day we see a poor man in a rich man's party. Some guests laughed. Some looked uncomfortable. Richard saw it. He could have stopped it. But he didn't. Instead, he raised his glass. Tonight, he said loudly, we celebrate success. People cheered. The driver stood frozen. Success. He remembered long nights of study. Dreams crushed by reality. Promises broken. A man deliberately pushed past him. The tray tilted. Wine spilled on the driver's shirt. Oh, the man said loudly. My mistake. Laughter followed. The driver looked down at his wet shirt. Slowly, he wiped it with a napkin. I'm sorry, the man said again, still smiling. The driver met his eyes. It's fine, he said. That calm again. It made people uneasy. Richard felt something twist inside his chest. This was going too far. Yet pride held him back. He walked toward the stage. Everyone, Richard said, tapping the microphone. Let's have some fun. He looked directly at the driver. Why don't you tell us something about yourself? He said. The hall went silent. The driver looked at him. This was not fun. This was a trap. You can speak, right? Richard added with a smile. Guests leaned forward. They wanted entertainment. The driver stood still. Then he spoke. I am here because I was invited, he said calmly. Laughter burst again. By who? Someone shouted. The driver looked at Richard. By you, he said. Richard laughed loudly. See? He's confused. The guests laughed too. But the driver raised his voice slightly. You invited me once before, he said. The laughter faded. The driver continued. Not to a party, he said, but to a dream. Richard's smile disappeared. What are you talking about? Richard asked sharply. The driver took a slow breath. You asked me to trust you, he said. And I did. A deep silence filled the room. People felt something heavy, though they didn't understand it. Richard felt sweat on his forehead. This was not going as planned. You should stop, Richard warned quietly. The driver nodded. I will, he said. But not yet. He looked around the room. At least let them see me, he said. Before I leave. Richard clenched his fists. The guests watched closely. Some felt uncomfortable now. Some felt ashamed. The driver turned away from the stage and walked slowly toward the exit. But before leaving, he stopped. He turned back one last time. "You laughed at me," he said calmly. "That's fine." He looked directly at Richard. But the truth always comes back. The doors closed behind him. Silence followed. Richard stood frozen. For the first time in many years, he felt afraid. The doors closed behind the driver. The sound echoed in the large hall. No one clapped. No one laughed. The music stopped. People looked at each other, confused. "What just happened?" someone whispered. Richard Hale stood still near the stage. His glass trembled slightly in his hand. He placed it down slowly. "This party is getting strange," a woman said quietly. Another man laughed nervously. He was just a driver. Too dramatic. But no one truly believed that anymore. Richard tried to smile. "All right," he said loudly. "Let's continue." Music. The band started again. Soft music filled the room. People returned to talking, but something had changed. The joy was gone. Richard moved away from the stage. His heart was beating faster than normal. Why did those words hurt? Why did that face feel familiar? Across the hall, an old businessman named Mr. Collins stood silently. He was one of Richard's earliest investors. He stared at the closed doors. His eyes narrowed. "I've seen that man before," he murmured. A younger man beside him laughed. "Sir, you see many people." Mr. Collins shook his head slowly. "No, not like him." He walked toward Richard. "Richard," he said carefully. "Who was that man?" Richard forced a laugh. "My driver," he replied. "He reads too much, thinks too much." Mr. Collins did not smile. "He spoke like a trained man," Collins said. "Not like a servant." Richard felt irritated. "You're overthinking," he snapped. Mr. Collins nodded, but his face showed doubt. Outside the hall, the driver stood near the hotel entrance. The night air was cool. He took a deep breath. Inside, he felt heavy but calm. He knew this was not over. A hotel staff member walked up to him. "Sir?" the man said politely. "Are you okay?" The driver nodded. "Yes," he said. "I expected this." The staff member hesitated. "You didn't deserve that." The driver smiled sadly. "Life doesn't ask what we deserve," he replied. Inside the hall, Richard sat down with a group of guests. They tried to talk about business, stocks, profits, expansion. But Richard's mind was not there. "You invited me once before. Not to a party, but to a dream." The words echoed again and again. Suddenly, Richard remembered something. A late night, a small office, two young men sitting across a table. One full of ideas, one full of hunger. Richard rubbed his forehead. "No," he whispered to himself. "That's impossible." Mr. Collins watched him closely. "Richard," he said slowly, "many years ago, you had a partner, didn't you?" Richard looked up sharply. "That's not relevant," he replied. "Was he poor?" Collins asked. Richard's jaw tightened. "Yes," he said. "So what? And smart." Collins continued. Richard did not answer. Silence spoke for him. Mr. Collins took a deep breath. "That driver," he said quietly. "His eyes. They reminded me of someone." Richard stood up suddenly. "This conversation is over," he said firmly. But the damage was done. Doubt had entered his mind. Back at the entrance, the driver looked at the city lights again. He remembered the day everything changed. A young Richard, big promises, shared dreams, then betrayal. The driver clenched his fist. Not in anger, in control. A black luxury car stopped near him. The driver stepped back, surprised. The window rolled down. Mr. Collins sat inside. "Get in," Collins said calmly. The driver hesitated. "Why?" he asked. "Because," Collins replied, "I think I owe you a conversation." The driver looked at the hotel behind him, then at the car. Slowly, He opened the door and sat inside. Inside the car, silence filled the space. After a moment, Collins spoke. "Tell me," he said, "what is your name?" The driver looked straight ahead. "My name doesn't matter yet," he replied. Collins nodded. "You were not there by accident," he said. "You wanted Richard to see you." "Yes," the driver said. "And remember," Collins added. "Yes." Collins exhaled deeply. "Then you are a brave man," he said. "Or a dangerous one." The driver finally turned toward him. "I am only a patient one," he said. Back inside the hotel, Richard stood alone near the window. The party continued, but he was no longer part of it. He felt watched, judged. For the first time in his powerful life, he felt small. The car moved slowly through the quiet streets. City lights passed by like silent witnesses. Mr. Collins sat beside the driver, his hands folded, his face serious. "You planned this," Collins said after a long pause. "You didn't just walk into that party." The driver looked out of the window. "I waited many years," he replied. "For the right moment." Collins nodded. "I could see it in your eyes," he said. "You weren't begging. You were reminding." The driver said nothing. Back at the hotel, Richard Hale stood alone near the bar. He loosened his tie. His head felt heavy. Guests laughed nearby, but the sound felt far away. A memory hit him hard. Two young men in a rented office. One working late into the night. One trusting too easily. Richard grabbed the edge of the table. "No," he whispered again. "It can't be him." A young executive walked over. "Sir," he said, "the guests are asking for you." Richard forced a smile. "I'll be there," he said, but he didn't move. Across the room, Mr. Collins' words echoed in his head. "You had a partner, didn't you?" In the car, Collins spoke again. "Years ago," he said, "a company proposal crossed my desk. Two names were on it." The driver's eyes darkened. "You remember," he said. "Yes," Collins replied. "One name disappeared later." The driver closed his eyes. "Not disappeared," he said. "Removed." Collins sighed deeply. "I didn't know the full story then," he said. "I was busy, careless." The driver turned toward him. "Carelessness changes lives," he said quietly. The car stopped at a red light. Silence filled the space. Finally, Collins asked the question. "Why now?" The driver answered without hesitation. "Because my mother is dying," he said. Collins looked at him, shocked. "She still believes in justice," the driver continued. "She thinks truth always wins." He smiled sadly. "I want her to see it once." Inside the hotel, Richard finally moved. He walked toward his private office inside the building. He locked the door behind him. His hands shook as he opened a drawer. Old files, old contracts, dust covered them. He pulled out one file, two signatures. One was his, the other. He froze. The name stared back at him. His heart began to pound. "That man," he whispered. Outside, Collins' car stopped near a quiet cafe. "Come," Collins said. "There is something you should see." Inside the cafe, Collins pulled out his tablet. He opened an old digital scan. A startup plan. The same plan Richard now held in his hands. "Your ideas," Collins said. "Your work." The driver nodded slowly. "He promised partnership," the driver said. "Then he pushed me out." Collins clenched his jaw. "That explains everything," he said. Back in the office, Richard collapsed into his chair. The driver's voice echoed in his head. "You invited me to a dream." Richard covered his face with his hands. He had told himself a story for years, that it was business, that it was survival. But deep down, he knew it was theft. In the cafe, Collins looked at the driver with new respect. "What do you want now?" he asked. The driver leaned back. "Not money," he said. "Not revenge." Collins raised his eyebrows. "Then what?" The driver looked straight into his eyes. "Truth," he replied, "in front of everyone." Back at the hotel, Richard stood up suddenly. He grabbed his phone. He hesitated. Then he made a call. "Find that driver," he said sharply. I need to talk to him. His assistant sounded confused. Sir. Now, Richard snapped. He ended the call. His reflection stared back at him in the mirror. For the first time, he didn't like what he saw. Outside the cafe, the driver stood up. This is not over, he said to Collins. No, Collins agreed. It's just beginning. The driver looked up at the dark sky. The truth was no longer hiding. It was coming. The night felt heavier than before. The driver stood outside the cafe, his hands in his pockets. The city moved around him, unaware of the storm building inside one powerful man's life. Mr. Collins watched him carefully. You're calm, Collins said. Too calm for someone facing his past. The driver gave a slow smile. I learned patience when I lost everything, he replied. Across the city, inside the luxury hotel, Richard Hale paced inside his private office. Back and forth. Again and again. The old file lay open on the table. 2 signatures. One name he had proudly shown the world. One name he had buried. Richard stared at it. That man was weak, he muttered. He couldn't survive. But his voice lacked strength. He remembered that man clearly now. Late nights. Shared coffee. Dreams drawn on paper. And then, fear. Fear of losing control. Richard slammed the file shut. No, he said firmly. I built this. I deserve it. He grabbed his phone again. Track him, he told his assistant. I want everything, background, records, family. The assistant hesitated. Sir, he has no public records. Very little history. Richard's jaw tightened. Then dig deeper, he snapped. The call ended. Back at the cafe, Collins looked at the driver. Richard will come for you, he warned. He won't stay quiet. I know, the driver replied. That's why I came. Collins paused. You could destroy him, he said. With proof. The driver shook his head. Destruction is easy, he said. Truth is harder. Collins studied him. You haven't even told me your name, he said. The driver looked at the road ahead. Names can be taken, he replied. Actions cannot. Collins nodded slowly. Inside the hotel, Richard left his office and walked back into the party. People turned toward him immediately. Sir. Richard. Everything okay? Richard smiled. Perfect smile. I have an announcement, he said loudly. The room grew quiet. I want to thank everyone for coming, he continued. This company was built on trust. The word burned his throat. And tonight, he added, I want to honor loyalty. Some guests clapped. Others exchanged confused looks. Richard's eyes scanned the room. He imagined the driver standing there again. Watching. Judging. He felt anger rise. If he wants truth, Richard thought, I will control it. Outside, the driver walked alone now. Collins had left him near a quiet street. The driver stopped under a streetlight. Memories flooded his mind. A younger Richard. A handshake. Promise. We'll build it together, Richard had said. The driver closed his eyes. Together, he whispered. A phone buzzed in his pocket. An unknown number. He answered calmly. Yes. A cold voice replied. This is Richard Hale. Silence followed. The driver felt no fear. I was wondering when you'd call, he said. Richard swallowed. Who are you? Richard asked sharply. The driver smiled faintly. You know who I am, he replied. You just chose to forget. Richard's grip tightened. Come to my office tomorrow, Richard said. We'll talk. Not privately, the driver replied. Not anymore. Richard's voice grew hard. You think you have power, he said. You don't. The driver's voice remained steady. Power is not money, he said. It's memory. The call ended. Richard stared at his phone. His heart raced. That calm voice haunted him. The next morning, the driver sat beside his mother's bed. She was weak, pale, but her eyes lit up when she saw him. You look tired, she whispered. He held her hand gently. I'm fine, he said. She smiled softly. You always were strong, she said. Just like your father. The driver's throat tightened. Do you remember his partner? She asked suddenly. The driver froze. Yes, he said quietly. She sighed. He betrayed us, she said. But don't let hate live in you. The driver nodded. I won't, he promised. Back at the office tower, Richard stood before the large glass windows. The city lay below him. Once, this view made him feel powerful. Now it felt like a cage. His assistant entered. Sir, she said, nervous. We found something. Richard turned quickly. A sealed agreement, she continued. It lists 2 founders. Richard's face turned pale. Destroy it, he said immediately. She hesitated. It's already registered. Richard's hands shook. The past was no longer silent. It was knocking, loudly. Morning light filled the city. Glass buildings reflected the sun, shining like mirrors. Inside the tallest tower stood Richard Hale's company, strong, rich, respected. But inside Richard, there was chaos. He sat at the long meeting table, staring at the sealed agreement file. 2 founders, 2 names, 1 truth. His board members sat around him, confident, powerful, blind. Richard cleared his throat. We have a situation, he said calmly. All eyes turned to him. A man tried to disrupt my birthday event, Richard continued. He claims to have a connection to this company. Some board members laughed. A driver? One asked. Richard nodded. Yes, a driver. More laughter. But one woman frowned. Why mention him at all? She asked. Richard paused. Because he won't leave, Richard thought. He could create rumors, Richard said aloud. We must protect the company image. Then sue him, someone suggested. Richard raised his hand. No, he said. That would give him attention. He leaned forward. We will invite him, Richard said. In front of everyone. The room went silent. You mean, publicly? A board member asked. Yes, Richard replied. Truth has many sides. A dangerous smile crossed his face. Outside the building, the driver stood across the street. He wore the same simple clothes, but his posture was different now. Strong, ready. Mr. Collins stood beside him. This is risky, Collins said. Richard controls that room. I know, the driver replied. That's why I need to stand there. Collins nodded slowly. Once you step in, he said, there's no going back. The driver looked up at the tower. I already went back once, he said. I won't again. Inside the boardroom, Richard gave instructions. Security will allow him in, he said. Let him speak. The board members looked shocked. You're sure? One asked. Yes, Richard said firmly. I want to see what he claims. Deep inside, fear moved like a shadow. At noon, the driver entered the building. People stared. Whispers followed him through the lobby. That's him. The driver. The one from the party. He walked calmly to the elevator. Inside the boardroom, the doors opened. The driver stepped in. The room froze. Board members stared. Expensive suits. Powerful faces. And among them, Richard Hale. Their eyes met. No anger. No fear. Just history. Thank you for coming, Richard said smoothly. The driver nodded. You invited me, he replied. Some board members exchanged looks. This is highly unusual, a man said. I agree, the driver replied. But necessary. Richard gestured toward a chair. Sit, he said. The driver remained standing. I stood outside too long, he said. I will stand here. The room went quiet. Richard tightened his jaw. Tell us your claim, Richard said. The driver took a breath. I helped build this company, he said calmly. Laughter erupted. Impossible, someone said. You were a child, another mocked. The driver looked at them. I was young, he said. Not useless. Richard raised his hand. Show proof, he said. The driver reached into his bag. He pulled out an old notebook. Worn, faded. He placed it on the table. Original plans, he said. Written by hand. The board leaned forward. Richard felt sweat on his neck. These mean nothing, Richard said quickly. The driver looked at him. Then why are you afraid? He asked. Silence cut deep. One board member picked up the notebook. These ideas, he said slowly, they match our first model. Richard snapped. This meeting is over, he said loudly. The driver shook his head. Not yet, he replied. He looked around the room. You laughed at me, he said. You mocked me. His voice stayed calm. But truth doesn't care who laughs. Richard stood up. You will leave, he said coldly. The driver finally moved. Not toward the door, but closer to the table. My name, he said clearly, will be remembered again. Richard's face went pale. A name was coming. Everyone felt it. The driver paused. The room held its breath. The room had gone silent. The guests, who were still trying to hide their embarrassment from laughing at the driver earlier, now stared with wide eyes. The billionaire, who had been smiling smugly, suddenly looked uneasy. Something about the driver's tone made the air heavy. The driver, still calm and quiet, walked slowly toward the center of the hall. His eyes scanned the room, and it seemed as though he knew exactly what he was doing. Everyone held their breath, wondering what he would say next. I was hired here many years ago, the driver said softly, his voice steady but firm. People laughed at me then, too. But I never laughed at anyone. I always worked hard, quietly. A few guests exchanged uncomfortable glances. Some were fidgeting in their seats. The billionaire's smile had vanished. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. The driver continued. You all think you are clever, making fun of someone who looks poor or simple. But appearances can be very deceiving. There was a pause. Everyone felt the weight of his words. Even the richest people in the room seemed small now. The billionaire finally spoke, his voice trembling slightly. Wait, what do you mean? The driver smiled faintly, but there was something chilling in that smile. Do you really want to know? He asked. The billionaire nodded, unsure of what was coming next. Then the driver reached into his pocket. He pulled out a small envelope and handed it to the billionaire. The guests leaned forward, curious. The billionaire opened the envelope slowly. Inside were documents, official papers, signatures, and a few photographs. His hands shook as he read. This can't be, the billionaire whispered. His eyes widened in shock. These are my company's secret contracts. The ones that were missing? The driver nodded. Yes, I have been working quietly for years, learning, observing, and waiting for the right moment. And now the moment has come. Guests started murmuring, realizing something big was about to happen. The atmosphere shifted from awkward laughter to tense curiosity. The driver looked around the room and then directly at the billionaire. Do you understand now? The person you laughed at, the person you mocked, was always closer to the truth than anyone here. A young woman in the crowd whispered to her friend, Is he a spy or a genius? The billionaire sank into his chair, unable to speak. His pride and arrogance had vanished in a matter of minutes. The driver's eyes softened for a moment, almost as if he felt pity. I never wanted revenge, he said. I only wanted justice. And sometimes, justice comes quietly, from the most unexpected places. The room stayed silent for a long moment. Then, slowly, the guests began to understand. This was not just a poor driver. This was someone with power, knowledge, and courage beyond what anyone could imagine. The driver turned, as if to leave, but then paused. Remember this day, he said softly. Because today, laughter is no longer proof of strength. Silence, patience, and truth are stronger than any wealth you can buy. With that, he walked out of the room. The door closed behind him, and the sound echoed like a drumbeat in everyone's hearts. No one moved. No one spoke. Everyone was too shocked to react. The billionaire's face was pale, a mix of fear and awe. The guests looked at each other, realizing that the poor-looking man had changed the game completely. For the first time in his life, the billionaire felt small. And for the first time, everyone understood. The driver was never ordinary. He was someone extraordinary. And they had all been blind. The air was thick with suspense. The guests whispered in hushed tones. No one dared laugh. No one dared speak. And in the back of the room, hidden behind the curtain, a security camera had captured everything. Someone would see this. Someone would know. And the driver's story was far from over. The first part of the driver's secret had been revealed, but the real story, the truth behind why he had done all this, and what he would do next, was yet to come. Everyone felt it. Something huge was coming. And no one in that room would ever forget the moment they underestimated a man. Because they laughed at him. The driver had disappeared behind the grand doors of the hotel, but the echo of his words lingered in the air like a heavy fog. Guests whispered nervously, unable to shake off the feeling that something extraordinary had just happened. Some glanced at the billionaire, who was still frozen in his chair, staring at the envelope in disbelief. The young woman who had earlier whispered about him being a genius now shook her head in awe. "Who is he really?" she murmured. "How could someone so ordinary-looking have all this power?" The billionaire finally found his voice, but it was weak and uncertain. "Who are you really?" he asked, his pride replaced by fear. "And why did you do this?" But the driver was already gone. His footsteps had vanished down the hallway, leaving only questions behind. The room felt emptier, heavier, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. The guests tried to gather their composure, but the silence was deafening. No one laughed. No one joked. Everyone was thinking, what just happened? What did we miss? The billionaire stood up, gripping the envelope tightly. His mind raced, trying to piece together the puzzle. How could someone so calm, so ordinary-looking, have known about the missing contracts? About the secrets that only he and a few trusted executives had access to? He felt a shiver run down his spine. The realization hit him hard. The driver had been planning this for years. Every laugh, every mockery, every sneer thrown at him had been ignored. And now, the driver had taken control without lifting a finger. Meanwhile, the driver was walking briskly down the city streets, away from the hotel. His expression was calm, but his mind was sharp. He knew the next step was crucial. The truth had to be revealed fully and carefully. One wrong move and everything could fall apart. He reached a small, quiet cafe tucked away in a side street. Inside, a young boy was waiting, nervously tapping his foot. The driver sat down across from him and handed over a small notebook. "It's time," he said. The boy nodded, understanding immediately. He had been part of this plan for months, helping quietly from behind the scenes. "Are you sure about this?" he asked. "I have to be," the driver replied. "They will underestimate us again, just like before. But this time we will be ready." Back at the hotel, the billionaire was pacing in his private office. He could not stop thinking about the driver. Who was he? How had he known everything? And why now, of all times, had he chosen to reveal the truth? His assistants tried to comfort him, but the billionaire barely heard them. His mind was consumed with fear and curiosity. He needed answers. He needed to see the driver again. But where would he find him? Suddenly, a notification appeared on his phone. An email from an unknown sender. The subject line was simple: "Meet me if you want the rest of the truth." The billionaire's hands trembled as he opened it. Inside, a single line of text read, "Tomorrow at the old warehouse by the docks. Come alone." A cold sweat ran down his forehead. He knew he had no choice. He had to go. But he also knew that walking into this trap could change everything. Forever. As night fell over the city, the streets grew quiet. The lights of the skyscrapers reflected in the water, and the wind whispered through the empty alleys. Somewhere in the shadows, the driver was already preparing. Every move was calculated. Every moment was critical. And somewhere, the billionaire was making his decision. Would he go? Could he face the truth? Could he survive the revelations waiting for him? The suspense was unbearable. Everyone, even the guests who had once laughed at the poor driver, now felt a mixture of fear and awe. They had witnessed the beginning of something extraordinary. But the story was far from over. The driver smiled faintly to himself. "Tomorrow," he whispered, Everything will change. And in that moment, the city seemed to hold its breath. The night was darker than usual. The city streets were empty, except for the distant hum of traffic far away. The billionaire drove in silence, his mind a storm of fear and questions. Every streetlight that flickered above him seemed like a warning. Every shadow along the road made him tense. The email had been clear: the old warehouse by the docks. Come alone. He knew he had no choice. If he wanted answers, if he wanted the truth, he had to go. Inside the warehouse, the driver waited. The large, abandoned space smelled of rust and dust. Moonlight slipped through broken windows, casting long, uneven shadows across the concrete floor. The driver's calm silhouette stood in the middle of the room, almost blending into the darkness. The billionaire stepped inside, his expensive shoes echoing against the bare floor. His heart pounded, and his palms were sweaty. "Who are you really?" he demanded, his voice shaking. Why are you doing this?" The driver didn't move immediately. He watched the billionaire carefully, his eyes sharp, almost piercing. Then he spoke softly but firmly. "I have told you part of the truth at the party. But this is the rest." The billionaire swallowed hard. "The documents, you showed me, everything. It was real?" The driver nodded. "Yes, everything. And there's more you don't know. More that will change everything for you, for everyone." The billionaire's knees felt weak. He had always thought money and power could protect him from anything. But now, standing in this cold warehouse, facing a man he had once mocked, he realized how little he actually knew. The driver stepped closer. "I have been part of your life longer than you think," he said. "I have seen every secret, every mistake, and I have waited for the right moment to act." The billionaire shook his head, fear and confusion battling inside him. "But why me? Why all this?" The driver paused. "Because you laughed at me. Because you and your guests thought my life was worthless. You saw my shoes, my clothes, and you judged me. That is why." A tense silence filled the warehouse. The only sound was the faint drip of water from the ceiling. The billionaire looked around, realizing there was no one else to help him, no one else to rely on. He was completely in the driver's world now. Then the driver reached into his coat. The billionaire flinched, expecting some weapon. But the driver pulled out something else, a small, black USB stick. "This contains everything," the driver said. "Evidence of secrets, frauds, betrayals, everything hidden behind your empire. Once this is released, nothing will ever be the same." The billionaire's face went pale. You can't do this. My reputation, my company, everything." The driver shook his head. "It's not about revenge. It's about truth, about justice. You may have money, power, influence, but none of that can hide the truth forever." For a moment, neither of them moved. The air felt electric, as if the warehouse itself was holding its breath. The billionaire knew that one wrong step, one wrong word, could change everything. Finally, the billionaire asked in a small voice, "What do you want from me?" The driver smiled faintly. "I want you to understand, to realize that judging someone by appearances can be dangerous. That laughter at someone else's expense can have consequences you never imagined." The billionaire lowered his head. Pride had always been his armor, but now it felt fragile and meaningless. For the first time, he felt truly small, truly powerless. The driver handed him the USB stick. "Take it," he said. "Decide your next move wisely. The choice is yours. But remember, every action has consequences, and every secret will come to light." The billionaire's hands trembled as he took the stick. He looked up at the driver, whose calm expression gave nothing away. For a moment, he felt fear, awe, and respect all at once. The driver turned, stepping back into the shadows. "This is not the end," he said softly. "It is only the beginning." The billionaire watched him disappear, feeling a strange mix of dread and curiosity. The city outside was silent, but inside, he knew his life would never be the same again. And somewhere, in the dark corners of the warehouse, The driver's eyes glinted with a quiet satisfaction. He had set the pieces in motion. Now all that remained was for the world to see the truth, and for the billionaire to face it. The suspense hung thick in the air. The night had only just begun. The billionaire left the warehouse with the USB stick clutched tightly in his hand. The streets were empty, and the cold night air made him shiver. Every step he took felt heavier than the last. His mind was racing, thinking of the secrets inside the USB and the consequences they could bring. He knew he could not ignore it. Every choice from now on would matter. One wrong move and his empire could crumble in a single night. Back in his penthouse, he locked the door behind him and sat alone in his office. He stared at the stick on the table, unwilling to touch it. His life had always been about control. Money, influence, respect, he had always had it all. But now, for the first time, he felt powerless. Finally, he opened the USB. The files were endless. Contracts, hidden accounts, private communications, documents proving betrayals, fraud, and secrets he had never imagined. His eyes widened as he scrolled through the evidence. It was worse than he had feared. Suddenly, his phone rang. The number was unknown. Hesitating, he answered. "Good evening," said a calm, familiar voice. The billionaire froze. "I see you received my message. I hope you understand its importance." The billionaire swallowed hard. "Who is this?" he asked, trying to hide his fear. The voice replied, "I am someone you once overlooked, but now you cannot overlook me. Everything you thought was safe is now in danger. You must act carefully." The call ended as suddenly as it began. The billionaire stared at the phone in shock. He realized that the driver's reach went further than he had imagined. This was not just about revealing secrets, it was about testing him, pushing him to a breaking point. The next morning, the billionaire called his most trusted executives. "We need a full audit. Everything immediately," he ordered. "And find me every connection to that USB stick. Someone is testing us." But inside, he knew it was not just about the USB. It was about the driver, the man who had walked in like a joke and now held his life in his hands. The billionaire's fear had grown into obsession. He could not stop thinking about him. Meanwhile, the driver was watching from a distance. Hidden in a quiet apartment across town, he observed the billionaire's every move through discreet cameras and carefully placed contacts. His plan was not about chaos, it was about lessons, about justice, and the billionaire's next moves would determine how the truth unfolded. The driver's young assistant, the boy from the cafe, looked at him nervously. "Are you sure he will do what we want?" he asked. The driver smiled faintly. "He will. He always does when his back is against the wall. Pride and fear together make people predictable." Back at the penthouse, the billionaire worked nonstop. He scrutinized every file, every document, every hidden clue. Sleepless nights passed as he tried to prepare for what was coming. Every move was calculated, but every time he thought he had control, he realized the driver had anticipated it. The tension was unbearable. Friends and colleagues began to notice his change. The once confident, arrogant billionaire now moved cautiously, as if the weight of invisible eyes was upon him. Then came the first real test. A confidential meeting with international partners was scheduled. Normally, he would walk in with confidence, commanding attention. But now he felt uncertain. What if the driver had set a trap? What if everything he had prepared was already anticipated? He arrived at the skyscraper for the meeting. The room was filled with powerful executives, investors, and lawyers. They expected the billionaire they knew, the confident, commanding figure. Instead, they saw a man tense, cautious, his mind clearly somewhere else. And then, in the middle of the meeting, an anonymous email appeared on everyone's laptops. A single line of text. "Trust is fragile. Secrets are fragile. Choose wisely." Gasps filled the room. The billionaire's heart raced. The driver had struck again. The first real challenge had begun. Outside, the driver watched silently, a faint smile on his face. He had set the first domino. Now it was time to see how far the billionaire would go, how much control he truly had. and whether he could survive the lessons the driver had prepared. The suspense was unbearable. Everyone in the room, even the investors, realized that something extraordinary was happening. The power dynamics had shifted, and the poor-looking man from the birthday party was the one controlling the game, even from the shadows. The driver's plan was unfolding perfectly, and one thing was certain: the billionaire's life would never be the same again. The billionaire sat in his office, staring at the screen of his laptop. The anonymous email had shaken the entire boardroom. His investors were whispering, some exchanging nervous glances, others trying to hide their fear. He knew that the driver's reach was far beyond what he had imagined. Every move he made seemed anticipated, every decision tracked. He rubbed his eyes, feeling the weight of sleepless nights. His empire, built over decades, now felt fragile. He had thought he controlled everything: money, influence, people, but the driver had proven him wrong. One man, underestimated by everyone, had changed the balance of power with just a few well-timed actions. The next challenge was immediate. Another email arrived, this time with attachments. Photographs, recordings, and documents revealing financial manipulations and secret betrayals inside the company. The billionaire's trusted executives were implicated, some even colluding with rivals. "Is this real?" he whispered to himself. His hands trembled as he opened the first file. Every piece of evidence was undeniable. He realized that the driver wasn't just testing him. He was forcing him to face the truth about the people he trusted most. The door to his office opened suddenly. His assistant, normally calm and composed, looked worried. "Sir, the board wants an urgent meeting. They've seen the files. They're asking questions, and they want answers now." The billionaire's heart sank. He had no choice. He had to face them, confront the consequences, and act quickly, before the situation spiraled completely out of control. In the conference room, tension was thick. Executives and board members were tense, each one glancing at the billionaire, waiting for his response. The atmosphere was no longer about business, it was about survival. Every eye in the room seemed to judge him, yet he knew the true orchestrator of this chaos was elsewhere. He took a deep breath. "We will investigate everything," he said, his voice steady but carrying an edge of fear. "Nothing will be hidden. Every file, every transaction, every secret will be examined." The room went silent. No one dared speak. Even the most confident executives realized that the billionaire had lost his usual control. And outside the corporate walls, the driver's plan continued silently. From a distant, hidden location, the driver watched the billionaire's every move. His young assistant, the boy, leaned forward nervously. "Do you think he'll handle it?" The driver shook his head slowly. "It's not about handling it. It's about learning." Pride and arrogance have blinded him for years. Now, he must face the truth, no matter how painful it is. Meanwhile, the billionaire stayed late in his office, analyzing every document. He discovered betrayals he had never suspected. Friends who had smiled and congratulated him were secretly plotting. Rivals he trusted were undermining him, and some executives had been siphoning funds for personal gain. For the first time, he felt the full weight of his world crashing around him. His wealth, his influence, his reputation, all seemed fragile, like glass ready to shatter. Then, another message appeared, this time physically delivered, slipped under the door. It was a small card with a single line. "Truth is heavy. Can you bear it?" The billionaire's chest tightened. He realized the driver was not just testing him for mistakes or weakness. He was testing his character, his judgment, and his courage. Every challenge was a lesson, and failure was not an option. The next morning, the media began to whisper. Anonymous tips and leaks hinted at scandals in the billionaire's empire. Reporters were circling like vultures. Investors were anxious. Employees whispered in the hallways. And the billionaire's carefully crafted image was starting to crumble. And somewhere, in the shadows, the driver watched quietly. He had set the first dominoes in motion. The billionaire's world was unraveling, not because of outside forces, but because of the truth he had ignored for too long. The billionaire clenched his fists, a mixture of fear and determination burning inside him. He knew he had to act fast, but he also knew the driver had anticipated every move. The stakes had never been higher. The suspense was unbearable, and everyone, inside the company, outside, and watching from afar, knew that the next step would decide everything. The driver's plan was working perfectly, and one thing was certain: nothing and no one would ever be the same again. The billionaire paced his office, the city lights casting long shadows on the walls. His empire, once untouchable, now felt like a fragile house of cards. Every new piece of information revealed more betrayals, more lies, more secrets. He realized that the driver's plan had gone far beyond testing him. It was forcing him to confront the harsh reality he had ignored for years. The boardroom meeting from the previous day had shaken everyone. Investors were hesitant, employees were whispering, and the media had begun picking up on the first leaks. The billionaire knew that if he didn't act fast, everything he had built could collapse within hours. He opened the USB again, scanning the files with an intensity he had never known. Among the contracts, he found messages between his trusted executives and rival companies, schemes to take over parts of his empire. The betrayal cut deeper than he expected. Friends he had considered loyal had been undermining him behind his back. Suddenly, his phone rang. The number was unknown. He hesitated but answered. "Good evening," said a calm voice. The driver's voice. "I hope you are beginning to understand." The billionaire's hands shook. "Why are you doing this? What do you want from me?" he asked, his voice trembling. "I want you to see the truth," the driver replied softly. "Not just about your empire, but about yourself. Pride can blind people. Arrogance can destroy them. And laughter at someone else's expense, can be dangerous." The billionaire swallowed hard. The words pierced him deeper than any threat ever could. He realized the driver wasn't trying to hurt him. He was teaching him, forcing him to awaken. "Everything, all these betrayals, everything you've shown me, it's too much," the billionaire whispered. "How can I fix this?" The driver's voice was calm but firm. "Fixing it begins with acknowledging the truth. Accept it, face it, and then take responsibility for your actions and your empire. Only then can you move forward." The call ended, leaving the billionaire in silence. For the first time, he reflected not as a powerful man controlling the world, but as a human being confronting his mistakes. The next day, he called an emergency meeting. His executives entered the boardroom, wary and tense. He stood at the head of the table, holding the USB stick, his expression serious. "I know about everything," he said firmly. "I know about the betrayals, the schemes, and the mistakes. And I know the person responsible for revealing this is someone I underestimated, someone I mocked." The room was silent. No one dared interrupt. "I made mistakes," he continued, his voice steady but humble. "I judged people by appearances. I trusted the wrong people, and I allowed arrogance to blind me. But that ends now." He handed the USB stick to the head of the board. "We will investigate every document. We will fix every wrong. And we will rebuild. Stronger, smarter, and fairer than before." A few executives looked at him with disbelief. Could this billionaire, known for pride and arrogance, really admit his faults so openly? But his sincerity was undeniable. Outside, the driver watched from a distance. He smiled faintly. The billionaire had taken the first real step. He had faced the truth, embraced responsibility, and begun the journey to change. The young boy who had assisted the driver asked nervously, "Do you think he will succeed?" The driver nodded. "He has the potential, but the road ahead will test him even more." This is only the beginning of his transformation. Back in the city, the billionaire left the meeting with a new determination. He knew that actions mattered more than words. He would have to repair relationships, confront betrayal, and restore trust. And he knew the driver was watching, silently guiding the process through challenges that no one else could foresee. The suspense hung in the air. The world was beginning to notice the changes, the billionaire's humility, his focus, and his resolve. And somewhere, in the shadows, the driver prepared the next phase. Because the story was far from over. The lessons were still unfolding. And the billionaire had only just begun to face the consequences of underestimating a man he once laughed at. The tension was at its peak, and the audience could feel it. Every decision, every step, every secret revealed. Everything was leading to a moment that no one would forget. The city waited. The billionaire prepared. And the driver, the man everyone once mocked, was quietly controlling the game from behind the scenes. The billionaire stood on the balcony of his penthouse, looking down at the glittering city below. Lights reflected on the glass buildings, but the beauty of the city meant nothing to him now. His mind was consumed with the driver, the man who had changed everything in a single night. He held the USB stick tightly in his hand, a constant reminder of the power of truth and the consequences of underestimating someone. Every move he made in the coming hours would be critical. Every decision could lead to redemption or complete disaster. Inside his office, his most trusted advisors were preparing a plan to regain control of the company. But the billionaire knew it wasn't just about money or power anymore. It was about integrity, about facing the truth, about proving he had learned from his mistakes. Suddenly, his phone buzzed with an unknown number. He hesitated, then answered. "Good evening," said the calm, familiar voice, the driver. "Are you ready for the final lesson?" The billionaire's stomach tightened. "Final lesson?" he asked. "Yes," the driver replied. "You have faced mistakes, betrayal, and humiliation. You have begun to change. But now, you must confront one final truth. Appearances can deceive, pride can blind, and laughter at someone else's expense can have irreversible consequences." The billionaire swallowed hard. "What do you want from me?" "Nothing more than understanding," the driver said. "Meet me at the place where it all began, your birthday party hall. Tonight, I will show you the full truth, and you will see that what you laughed at was never what it seemed." The billionaire felt a chill run down his spine. He realized the driver was about to reveal the ultimate secret, something that would change everything. His company, his life, and perhaps even his very perception of power. Hours later, the party hall was empty except for the billionaire, who had arrived alone, heart pounding, anticipation mixing with fear. The chandeliers sparkled above, but the grandeur of the hall now felt cold, silent, and foreboding. A shadow moved near the center of the hall. The driver stepped into the light, calm, confident, and composed. He looked at the billionaire and smiled faintly. "Welcome back," he said softly. "Are you ready?" The billionaire nodded, though his hands shook. He had come this far, faced countless revelations, and endured humiliation, betrayal, and fear. He knew there was no turning back. The driver placed a folder on the table. Inside were photographs, videos, and documents that revealed the real story. Hidden truths about the billionaire's closest allies, unseen dangers, and the lives of people he had overlooked or judged. "This," the driver said, "is the truth behind the laughter. Every joke, every insult, every small moment of mockery. It hides a larger reality. Look closely, and you will see what you missed." The billionaire opened the folder and gasped. Images of his own decisions, taken out of context, showed not his arrogance but misunderstandings, mistakes, and moments where he had actually helped people quietly, unknown to anyone. He realized that he had misjudged everyone, and everyone had misjudged him. Tears welled up in his eyes. I never knew. I didn't see," he whispered. The driver stepped closer. "Now you understand. Appearances are not the truth. Pride is not the measure of strength. And laughter can hide lessons if you are too blind to see them." The billionaire's chest tightened. He finally understood the weight of humility, patience, and observation. He had laughed at the driver, underestimated him, and yet, the driver had quietly orchestrated a plan that taught him the most important lessons of his life. "Your empire, your power, your life," the driver said softly, "all of it can be rebuilt, but only if you lead with wisdom, empathy, and truth. That is your final lesson." The billionaire bowed his head, overwhelmed by emotion. He had come seeking answers, and he had received more than he ever imagined. Humility, awareness, and understanding. The driver turned, moving toward the exit. "Remember this night," he said. "The world will judge quickly, but truth always finds its way." As the driver disappeared into the shadows, the billionaire stood alone in the hall. The silence was complete, yet it felt alive. Every mistake, every betrayal, every laugh, every secret had led to this moment of awakening. He finally understood, and in that understanding he found strength. Not the kind of strength money could buy, but the kind that came from truth, humility, and resilience. The suspense remained, but now it carried a new weight, a sense of resolution, a promise that the final act, the revelation, was only moments away. The billionaire looked around the empty hall, realizing that life would never be the same. And somewhere, unseen, the driver's plan was complete, but the world was only about to see its consequences. The city lights shimmered outside the luxury hall, but inside, everything was silent. The billionaire stood alone, holding the folder the driver had left behind. Every moment of the past days, the laughter at the party, the shocking revelations, the betrayals, the fear, came rushing back. He finally understood the depth of the lesson. Life, he realized, was not about wealth or pride. It was about truth, perception, and respect. And the man he had mocked, the driver, was not merely an employee. He had been a teacher, a guide, and a silent force reshaping everything around him. The door creaked softly. The driver stepped back into the hall, calm, composed, and confident. His eyes met the billionaire's, and for the first time, the two men shared a moment of complete understanding. "You see now," the driver said softly,